Drones can be extremely efficient from this point of view because thanks to the use of, really common cameras, but thanks to the development of photogrammetric software, it's possible to collect pictures and to process pictures and to develop 3D models that are very, very accurate.
You're listening to the Drone Radio Show podcast, the show about drones and the people who use them for business, fun, and research. Hosted by Randy Goers.
Hello, everyone. This is Randy Goers, and welcome to the Drone Radio Show podcast, episode 168. How are drones used in archaeology? For that question, we turn to Stefano Campana, one of Italy's most active and inventive professors, specializing in landscape archaeology, remote sensing, and archaeological methodology for research, recording, and conservation. His work is focused on the understanding of past landscapes, from the protohistory to the present day. His research is centered primarily in Tuscany, but he has also participated in and led research in the UK, Spain, Turkey, Palestine, Iraq, and Asia. He has written extensively on UAV use in archaeology, with a particular focus on practical considerations, sensors, and data processing. His writings stress the benefits of UAV systems, specifically their cost, accuracy, and control of data capture. In this edition of the Drone Radio Show, Stefano talks about how drones are used in the field of archaeology, their strengths and limitations, and what archaeologists should consider when planning to use drones in their research. But before we hear from Stefano, I want to thank those of you who have been supporting my funding campaign on Patreon. For as little as $1 per month, you can help defray the cost of production and keep the podcast going and growing. Go to patreon.com/drone radio show to join the team. Now let's learn how drones are used in the field of archaeology with Professor Stefano Campana of the University of Siena. Let's pick up the interview where I asked Stefano to tell us about himself.
Well, I'm an archaeologist. I'm mainly specialized in landscape archaeology, which means mainly to not just to be focused on site, but on landscape transformation. So how the landscape has been transformed from different societies across time. And that's why I'm particularly interested in remote sensing technologies and GIS. And that's why, of course, drones are pretty appealing from my point of view.
And you're also a professor at the University of Siena in archaeology.
I'm originally Swiss. I come from Switzerland, but I moved to get my higher education at the University of Siena in Italy, and I also got an experience of 2 years as a postdoc at the University of Cambridge. Then I come back to Siena, where I got my professorship.
What subjects or areas do you teach at the university?
My courses are focused on landscapes and transformation of landscapes across time, but also on digital technologies, because I'm also teaching digital archaeology. Recently, I got also interested and I got the opportunity to start a course on cultural diplomacy and archaeology.
Can you give us an example of what you mean by transformation of the landscape over time?
When we talk about transformation, landscape transformation, there are different interpretations of transformation or different point of view. So settlement transformation, so settlement patterns, communication systems, but also the landscape from the environmental point of view. And what I'm more interested in from the agricultural point of view, because agriculture in the past, in past societies, so pre-industrialized societies, was the main opportunity to get, was the richness, I would say, the most important good. And in the past, for instance, the landscape around Siena, that generally speaking, people coming, visiting this area, they are really impressed from the landscape, and they think that the landscape was not that different in the past. And they have also the impression that this is a rural landscape, very preserved, but it's completely wrong, because the landscape around Siena is a landscape mainly based on monoculture, so is mainly based on grain production, or sometimes even, of course, wine production. But the landscape in the past was completely different. So agriculture was, there was a strong melting of different kind of products. So, for instance, vineyards were not just vineyards, but within the rows, grain or different kind of cultivation were developed. So the landscape, the agricultural patterns, the settlements were very different in the past. And what we can see now is just, let's say, the current outcome of transformations. To give you a quick example, in the Roman times, settlement patterns were mainly based on Roman villas, which were not that far from lowlands. During the Middle Age, everything changed, and the main settlement patterns were based on castles that were on the top of hills. And also agricultural patterns change due to different position of settlements and people and so forth.
So let's talk about drones in archaeology. Based on your research, how are drones typically used in the archaeological field today?
In my view, I would say that there are 5 main different kind of application, but the first 2 are the most common. So, first of all, documentation of archaeological excavation. That's also the starting point. Archaeological excavation is generally a pretty slow process, and to get very good and detailed documentation takes also lots of time. Moreover, doing documentation means also that you can't work. I mean, you can't carry on the excavation. You just need to stop everything and just to be focused on archaeological documentation. So drawing maps and taking pictures and so on. Drones can be extremely efficient from this point of view because thanks to the use of, well, pretty common cameras, but thanks to the development of photogrammetric software, it's possible to collect pictures and to process pictures and to develop 3D models that are very, very accurate. That's very interesting for archaeologists because from the one hand, it's possible, to manage the process very quickly and in a very efficient way. And from the other hand, it's also interesting because, photogrammetric documentation allow also to standardize the quality of the documentation. So that's one application which is very, very interesting. The other one is the documentation of standing monuments. So churches, temples, old cities are all evidence and features that can be documented thanks to photogrammetric techniques in a very, very accurate and efficient way. And I would add that, if we think about the awful destruction that happened recently in the Near East, it is pretty clear, how interesting can be or could be, just in case we did in the past, this kind of documentation to conserve at least, the memory of evidence that has been completely destroyed. In the worst case, by record, so by 3D documentation, which is also interesting because, it's possible also, thanks to this kind of documents, to think about very, very accurate and good replicas, just in case. Well, these are the 2 main applications. There are others, which are the 3D modeling of landscape, and the other one is aerial reconnaissance, but this is not that developed. There are very, very few case studies. And another interesting opportunity that, we are working on, but there are also some other scientists that are doing that, is Lidar. So the application, the use of Lidar on drones, which is extremely interesting because I mean, Lidar is not just another way to collect 3D data, but Lidar, from the point of view of archaeologists, is extremely interesting because allow us to go through the forest, so go through wooded areas and get information on micromorphology that is under canopy.
With so much of the planet covered by the tree canopy, do drones offer a realistic opportunity to map those areas?
Absolutely. Well, let's say traditional urban platform already collected very good case studies, and I mean, the system works perfectly. So the technology is there. The combination of drone with urban LiDAR is still ongoing, I would say, because, I mean, urban LiDAR sensors are still pretty heavy, and, I mean, you need a pretty good platform, a pretty expensive one, too. But the drone market, the drone environment is growing so fast. I mean, I have no doubt, I mean, that this is already the present and will be definitely the future.
Are the sensors capable of discovering new sites, especially walls or structures beneath the ground?
The answer is definitely yes. You don't need to do that LiDAR. I mean, just traditional aerial photography can perfectly achieve this goal. This kind of application has been not that developed up to now. There are some interesting case studies, but it's not that developed due to some, I guess, reason mainly connected with some domestic laws and some difficulties to manage over the large-scale drones. Because, for instance, in Italy, you are still, let's say, forced from the domestic law to get high contact with your platform, which don't allow the pilot or, in any case, I mean, the archaeologist to cover very large areas. And to do this kind of activity needs definitely, I mean, to work over a pretty large area.
How prevalent are drones being used in archaeology today?
Are getting more and more used. In the last 3 years, I would say, become more and more common thanks to some very low-cost solutions that are working very, very well. So, of course, I mean, price is extremely important. It's pretty common now to find archaeologists and to go on archaeological excavation, to visit archaeological excavation, and to see people using drones for archaeological documentation.
You mentioned that typically price is a concern for archaeologists. So in terms of the drone hardware and software, what are some of the considerations?
That's a good question also because, I mean, we are talking about drones, but archaeologists are not that interested in drones because, I mean, archaeologists are interested in data that drones can collect. So, as you said, the quality of the images is extremely important. So, depending from the kind of camera that is possible to use, it's possible, I mean, to see or not to see, to get some good results or to get some low quality results. So, the camera or the sensor is extremely important. But of course, I mean, the drone is also important because depending from the quality of the drone, it's possible or it's not possible, I mean, to use some kind of sensor. So it's definitely a collaborative system, I would say. So the problem is that to use very, very high quality cameras is still needed to buy pretty expensive drones, and that's the limit, definitely. But, for instance, DJI is a very good system, at least from our point of view in archaeology. It's possible to collect pretty good quality data, pretty good images. Of course, I mean, having the opportunity to use mirrorless cameras or full-frame reflex cameras, this is even better. But it depends from the goal. Generally speaking, for the documentation of archaeological excavation, we need good quality cameras. Moreover, from the point of view of the resolution, we have the control of the drone, so we can just reduce the height and get better resolution.
Is there a software that you have found that is most helpful in bringing the images together?
I would say all the archaeologists that I know, is Photoscan. That is a Russian system to build 3D models starting from pictures. So, in my knowledge, all the archaeologists are using roughly this system, this software, which works very, very well.
Can you share a couple of examples of where you use drones?
A pretty interesting case study, in my view, is the case study of Santa Marta, which is an archaeological excavation we are running since 2012 between Siena and Grosseto. And in this area, we started from the beginning collecting just digital documentation and using drone to get pictures and to develop 3D models. What's the difference, compared with the traditional approach? Well, there are lots of differences, I would say. First of all, when the process has been developed and is working well, there is a big improvement in the efficiency of the work and the overall result. The pretty interesting stuff is that this is a big excavation. That's an excavation of a Roman villa with thermal bath, so it's a pretty big excavation. I'm talking about roughly 1,500 square meters. That's the area with buildings or features connected with buildings, so that's the area of the villa, which is a big area, to be documented and of course, also to be excavated. So what I mean by to be excavated, that is definitely impossible, to excavate such a big area altogether. And what happened is that when you excavate a piece of this area, the other pieces that has been already excavated are covered by tapes. So 3D digital documentation allow us to see in the 3D all the area together, which is very, very interesting to develop 3D modeling, for instance, 3D reconstruction, or just to communicate to the general public the overall results and to give them also the feeling of the dimension of this big complex. Another opportunity another occasion where we used the drone was in Pompeii, within the so-called big Pompeii Project. This project was aimed to document digitally and in the 3D the whole city. And we have been involved to work on a piece of the city, so it was roughly 6 hectares. And we used the drone to collect some information that was not possible to collect from the ground, for instance, roofs or some details that were definitely not visible from the ground. Another application that is very interesting is before we talk about aerial reconnaissance, so the possibility to detect sites that are still underground. Drones are very interesting from this point of view because it's possible not just to use, let's say, traditional air photography. When I say traditional air photography, I mean black and white or color photography. But it's also possible, for instance, to use cameras to explore and document parts of the electromagnetic spectrum that our eyes can recognize. So I'm talking about, for instance, the near, mid, and thermal infrared. And there are cameras that has been developed for drones and that we can use on drones to identify evidence that are underground. And that's also something that we are working on, and mainly we are working in Veio, that is a very, very important Etruscan city, very close to Rome, so 15 kilometers from Rome, and that is completely underground. We did lots of prospection there, we did geophysics, but also we used this kind of system, and the overall result was very, very interesting, and we got the opportunity to detect features connected to temples or to a circus and to some other evidence that were not visible using other kind of systems.
Did the authorities move forward with an excavation to uncover those features?
Oh, no, not necessarily. And I would say that, archaeological excavation is very expensive, and above all, the soil that is covering evidence, so archaeological evidence, is also protecting evidence. What happened, say, in the best case, is that the local authorities tried to convince, I would say, the landowner, for instance, to plow at a smaller depth, or sometimes also they try to push him to avoid plowing because that is countryside and, is agricultural areas, and plowing or this kind of activities can be extremely dangerous for archaeological evidence. But, if you leave evidence there, under the soil is going to protect them. And if you don't have a project to excavate and develop a public park, for instance, sometimes can be better to avoid excavating because, excavating and then leaving archaeology there is terrible for archaeology. So, for the conservation of features, and is very bad.
Well, it just shows how important it is to consider the overall management of the site, not just uncovering it.
Exactly like that.
When other archaeologists talk to you about drones, what type of questions do they seem to bring up most?
Well, generally, as we said, archaeologists are pretty concerned about money because we are always short in money. So that's a typical problem. Well, sometimes I think they are pretty interested in the opportunity to see evidence under canopy. They are generally very, very interested in this opportunity. And so they are pretty curious to know better, the opportunity and the limitation of this application, and also are interested in the opportunity to recognize new evidence which are underground. So what I was just talking about, so thermal cameras and this kind of features.
Also, it's important to note that drones are just one tool that an archaeologist has at his or her disposal.
Yeah, exactly. We are not using just drones. We are using lots of different technologies and systems to detect archaeology or to document what is there.
So how do they fit into the overall workflow from your perspective?
Drones are particularly interesting. One reason is definitely the scale. Drones are working and are occupying a scale of detail that was empty. So if you need to collect data or information from a remote system about 10 square kilometers, is pretty crazy, to ask to a company that is using helicopters or traditional aircraft to collect those information, because it would be extremely expensive and nobody's going to do that. Drones can do that very efficiently at a fair price, at a fair cost. So drones are working very well at what I would define as the local scale, which is not just the site scale, it's the local scale. So it's the body scale, it's the scale where people also in the past, were living, the landscape that, above all, that belonged to the people of the past, because, they didn't have any car or any system, to go too far. So that's one point. The other point that is crucial in my view is that drones can now manage directly from archaeologists. And this is extremely important because, if you are dependent from another scientist or from another knowledge, this is pretty difficult, to get into the application and to develop application for your field of research. You need to make your hand dirty. You need to use the technology. You need to be able, to use yourself the drone, to pilot the drone and to do yourself the stuff that you need. And that's the way, to develop original experience. So I think that these are two very good reasons to make drones so interesting and which may improve our opportunity to understand the past.
Is there a height limit in Italy?
Yeah, it's 150 meters.
What sort of rules or requirements are there? I mean, do pilots have to be registered or certified?
Yeah, absolutely. So the law is based on the weight of the platform. So below 25 kilos is relatively easy, I would say. You need to get the license. And if you are flying in, well, not in a urban area, the legislation is not that difficult. I mean, it's pretty easy, to do what you have to do there. Urban areas is pretty critical, so it's not that easy, to get the permission. But, archaeologists generally are much more interested in areas that are not that populated, and so this is not a real problem. But this is a very important point that I'm always stressing students about, because there is sometimes, I would say, the wrong approach, and drones are seen as toys, but drones are not toys, and can be dangerous. So it's very, very important to be prudent, to know very well the local regulation, and to be always very, very careful, because it happens that some people, some very bad injuries.
Now, as I understand it, you also manage a company called ATS Limited that provides archaeological and cultural services. It's also aimed at technology transfer for cultural heritage. Can you tell us about it and how it's linked to the university?
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's a spin-off company. I started the spin-off in 2009, and the spin-off mission was from the beginning, technological service for archaeology and cultural heritage. So people that are working in this company are students, my students, which are specialized in different sector of remote sensing. And the company was pretty successful because we won also some prizes. So the Innovation Award in 2009 and some other awards in the last 5 years. The company is specialized in geophysics, in archaeological prospection, is also specialized in drone. So we got now 3 drones, 2 multi-rotor system, a DJI, an iBotics, and a fixed wing. Now, thanks to a collaboration with the CNR, which is the Italian National Research Center, we should get also the opportunity to share, I would say, a sort of real helicopter, which is a pretty big system that may allow us to collect also Lidar data and as well thermal information and some other sensors. So the company is working mainly in Italy, but we got also experience in the UK, in Iraq, and in Central Asia. We got some experience also in Turkmenistan. So it's a pretty good experience. And I like very much, the system, I would say, that we try to develop, because the connection of the company with the university. The university is developing, let's say, new application. So I would say is doing research, but at the same time also the spin-off company is applying some results of our research, and it's possible also to share people, to share experience. I think it's a very positive experience. I'm very happy of that.
It provides an opportunity for students that are in the field to not only learn about the techniques, but actually work in a real situation?
Exactly, absolutely. It's not possible, for everybody to work within the university, but the company give them the opportunity to carry on their experience, to carry on and to spend also their knowledge within archaeology, within remote sensing. And so it's a good opportunity, I think, for all of us.
When you're speaking at conferences, what's the main message that you're trying to convey to your audience about drones?
Yeah, well, I have a take-home message, but I already told you. In my view, the real change, the real opportunity is exactly what I told you previously. So it's the opportunity of the archaeology to directly lead the application. So we have the control of the platform. So using and controlling a drone means that I can go and do field work and use my drone at any time, developing new approaches, taking pictures in the early morning, in the afternoon, the sunset, and I'm totally free to develop my experience. So I have no doubt that's the real opportunity that drones provide to archaeologists, because when you are dependent from somebody else, it's always very difficult, because from the one end it's very expensive, from the other end there are maybe some logistical problem. However, it doesn't work. That's, I would say, is a lesson learned.
What's the future look like for drones in archaeology?
Well, let's start from the past. So we started working with drones in 2005, and at that time it was really awful, I would say, because from the one end it was very exciting, it was something absolutely new, but up to 2013, I would say, it was very, very difficult. We started doing tests to get archaeological information on the excavation, so to take pictures on the excavation from the air. But every time we got a different problem. Every time we got lots of troubles for flying, troubles for processing the data, and the process was really bad. So that was roughly 10 years ago. Now, as I told, is roughly a standard. I mean, using drones to do documentation on the archaeological excavation or to collect 3D data. And the development, above all, in the last 5 years was incredible fast. And everything changed, not just platforms. So platforms become much more reliable, much more easy to use. Most of them now are possible, to plan the flight, and the drone is doing roughly everything. But also sensor improved. Now we can talk about Lidar, we can talk about different kind of sensors. And also another important point is that the software to process the data improved substantially. So the whole pipeline improved in the last 10 years in an incredible way. Last September, I've been invited in France, in Toulouse, where there was something like a World Congress on drones, and they asked me to give a talk on archaeological application. Well, I gave my talk, but however, it was so interesting to listen about the new development in this field.
And for my final question, Stefano, 10 years from now, how do you think drones will have changed the way archaeological and cultural research is conducted?
I'm very optimistic. I think that the next 10 years will change again. The overall scenario, because a pretty interesting information that I got there is that, for instance, they are working a lot on the understanding of bird flight or bugs flight. So they are developing, for instance, systems that can fly and at the same time go underwater. And so it's amazing. There is very, very important improvement. And I'm pretty sure that there will be lots of surprise also for our field. So, about the main contribution of drones to the understanding of archaeology, well, that's a pretty difficult question, I would say. It's not that easy, because technology is not exactly going to change historic patterns or the understanding of history. So maybe it's just providing new data, and we can think about that data and maybe change some parts of our understanding of the past. So, generally speaking, I think that drones are going to be more and more important within the field of archaeology and within the devices that may help us to better document, to better see, to better understand what is in the landscape.
That's it for episode 168 of the Drone Radio Show. I hope you enjoyed hearing from Professor Stefano Campana of the University of Siena and learning how drones are used in archaeology. I want to thank Stefano for taking the time to speak with me. If you want to learn more about drones and archaeology, or want to connect with Stefano, contact him through the Laboratory of Landscape Archaeology and Remote Science at the University of Siena. The web address is lapetlab.it. If you like the Drone Radio Show, please consider supporting the podcast with a small donation. The content is always free, but for as little as $1 per month, you can help defray the cost of production. To donate, go to patreon.com/drone radio show. And thanks for listening. Your support means a lot to me, and I hope you'll listen to more episodes of the Drone Radio Show podcast to hear how others are using drones for business, fun, and research. For the Drone Radio Show, I'm Randy Gores.
This has been the Drone Radio Show podcast. More information on today's show can be found on our website at www.droneradioshow.com. If you're using drone technology for business, fun, or research and would like to share your experience on the show, please visit our website and fill out a guest appearance application. And don't forget to follow us on your favorite social media channels.